Dzogchen Semde Lama, I should say, this is the Dzogchen Semde Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. Come, let us explore. Want better meditation? Stop trying so hard. And then meditate like a Jedi. This morning's lesson is based upon the third verse of the Dzogchen classic, The Spaciousness of Vajrasattva. Known in Tibet as, and forgive my pronunciation, known in Tibet as Dorje Sempa Namkache. It was composed many centuries ago by the great Buddhist performer Prahe Vajra, known in Tibet as Gaurab Dorje. So, let's get to it. What I'm going to do is first just read this, then explain it, then read it again. So let's see, how do I want to do this? Well, I want to go to Word, and I want to push this text here. Oh, the wonders of OBS, eh, kids? Okay, here we go. By the way, this bloke, what sits on the right, is an artist's rendering of Prahe Vajra. Phenomena are not other than the condition of watching's true knowledge. Without input on our part, they effortlessly appear and disappear. Naturally arising wisdom need not be actively sought. Self-liberating by nature, it restively reveals the way. So anytime you see standard font, that's the translation. When you see an italicized word the same size as all the other words, that is an adaptation. When you see me put a smaller font word between brackets, that is an amplification. In the final passage of the Buddha's concise meditation manual, he promised that the fruit of practice is true knowledge, was true knowledge and liberation. So what this passage is doing is taking this ancient concept and tearing it out of the clutches of institutional Buddhism. Why would it wish to do that? When we think of Buddhism, we can think of two camps. There is proto-Buddhism, and when we follow the practices of proto-Buddhism, we cannot help but be flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. However, when we apply the instructions of institutional Buddhism, we cannot help but be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. So what Prahe Vajra was saying was like, guys, let's be less rigid and less controlling and instead be more flexible and more laid back. To put this in contemporary parlance, let's be less like grumpy Mace Windu and more like groovy Qui-Gon Jinn. Or let's be less like the Big Lebowski and more like the Dude. when I was when I was a personal trainer in uh, way back in the early 80s, you guessed it, when the crust of the earth was still cooling. It was, it was a popular aphorism was no pain, no gain. The Russians had a different idea. They thought it's better not to hurt yourself, but to practice at 80 or only 70% of your maximum effort. They called that greasing the groove, and they got much better results in the performance of their athletes than we did. We also, in the 80s, heard the phrase, if it is to be, it's up to me. And that became the anthem of those who were much more rigid and controlling and elitist than they were flexible and laid back and egalitarian. If it's to be, it's up to me is also the anthem of those who would rather be competitive than cooperative. I had the very good fortune to once hear the following show me joke. You show me a self-made man, and I'll show you the Frankenstein monster. One of the greatest ironies is that the hardest path is seldom the most productive path, and the easiest path that is also the quickest and most efficient and most productive. What's it called? The fourth enlightenment factor is joy. Joy is a wonderful litmus test of our method of practice. More grumpy our spiritual practice makes us, the less effective it is. The more joyful it makes us, the more useful it is. Joy could be an excellent barometer, an excellent litmus test. So let's return to the root text. Let's see, I'm going over here, clicking this button. Phenomena are not other than the condition of watching's true knowledge. So the essence of the most essential meditation instructions are to silently and mentally recite the verb watch every time we feel our chest swell with breath, and to silently and mentally recite the verb rest every time we feel our chest subtly sink as gently we exhale. So you're going to find me trying to crowbar those phrases into the text as much as possible to transform it from less of a pseudo-intellectual philosophical artifact and more into a trenchant meditation manual. Elitists take this text, which contradicts everything they practice, and say, well, this is only for special people. But the author was egalitarian, and he meant this to be shared with everybody. So phenomena are not other than the condition of watching's true knowledge. As they say on South Park, what? Consider this. When I was first dating the individual who is now my tantric partner, they warned me, I can be a handful. To which I responded, then your handfulness will simply be grist for my mill. All that life throws at us can actually turn the water wheels of our enlightenment mill. So as we relax into our exhalation, whatever scarcity or lack or peril or safety we might have noticed during our previous inhalation could feel as if it was melting into the simplicity of circumstantial energy. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever pleasure or pain we might have watched or noticed during our previous inhalation could feel as if it was melting into the simplicity of just physical energy. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever praise or scorn we might have noticed during our previous inhalation could feel as if it was melting into the simplicity of interpersonal energy. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever fame or shame we might have noticed during our previous inhalation could feel as if it was melting into the simplicity of just mental energy. And so we're not lying to ourselves about what we perceive. We're just processing what we perceive in a way that's deeply beneficial. So here's a wonderful irony. The more we play with the watching and resting that are also known as mindfulness and meditation, the more our choices and our utterances and our deeds flow, not from calculated contrivance, not from wild with a D, wild scatterness, but instead from love's deeply centered spontaneity. Guided by love's deeply centered spontaneity, it becomes safe to use all our neurological resources. The key to using all our neurological resources in the most sustainable way is to cultivate love's deeply centered spontaneity through the easy practice of watching and resting. Without input on our part, they effortlessly appear and disappear. We do not need to chase beauty, harmony, pleasure, deliciousness, or fragrance. We do not need to flee ugliness, discord, pain, that which is disgusting or odious. We just, instead of let us pretend meditation is like a theater. Let us remember that we are not the producer, the director, the playwright, or the thespian. We are merely the bloke what sits in the audience, watching the antics on stage. We can set aside our controlling tendencies. We don't have to be like Victor von Frankenstein. Naturally arising wisdom need not be actively sought. My first teachers were the poster children for institutional Buddhism. They taught me to study, contemplate, and memorize various outlines for what they described as a gradual path to enlightenment. And I I memorized and studied and contemplated exactly what I was taught. But it did not give me freedom of heart. It made me compressed and anxious and aggressive. And it did the same thing for my classmates, and it seemed to do the same thing for my teachers. So we're taught that simply by vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly cooperating with the mechanisms of our autonomic nervous system that automatically notices as we breathe in and automatically relaxes as we breathe out. By passively cooperating with that, we experience the visceral wisdom that takes that which we noticed during our previous inhalation and processes it in such a way as to make it feel fleetingly less stressful, less permanent, less defining, and even less tangible, at least for a moment, until the next inhalation when the cycle begins anew. Just like the seemingly perpetual motion of the pendulum of a grandfather clock. So now that I've explained this passage, I'd like to read it one more time. Phenomena are not other than the condition of watching's true knowledge. Without input on our part, they effortlessly appear and disappear. Naturally arising wisdom need not be actively sought. Self-liberating by nature, it restively reveals the way. I'm going to return to button number 2. Want better meditation? Stop trying so hard. Our job is not to contemplate. Our job is not to concentrate. Let's go over here for a second. Let's go back to button 9, and I shall assail you with images of neural anatomy. The more we actively focus, well, we can only actively focus and only actively analyze in reliance upon our dorsolateral medial prefrontal cortex. We overwork them at our peril, for overworking them induces us to present with symptoms of depression, no less trigger our amygdala, the seat of anxiety and aggression. How darkly ironic is it to say, I want to be loving and peaceful, and then you do some exercises that make you the opposite of loving peaceful. What is the opposite of loving and peaceful? Anxious and aggressive. Some of these people who are just really stuck in institutional Buddhism will just double down and they'll say, well, if some focusing and some analyzing is making me anxious and aggressive, then I'm going to focus and analyze on the downfalls of being anxious and aggressive, as well as focus and analyze the benefits and causes of being loving and peaceful. And while that might sound good on paper, all it does is further exhaust the front of our brain and further trigger our amygdala, and nobody wants that. However, simply, passively cooperating with our autonomic nervous system calms our amygdala and gently stimulates our seat of empathy, known as the anterior cingulate gyrus. We can think of our autonomic nervous system of having two parts, like a right and left hand, both of which most bodies find useful. Let us consider mindfulness. Every time we inhale, we are wired to automatically access the middle bit of our spinal cord. That could be described pretentiously as the nexus of our sympathetic nervous system. It has evolved to help us to vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice mind's antics of perception, emotion, intention, cognition, recollection, imagination, be they external or internal, physical or mental, pleasurable or painful, interesting or boring, glorious or grotesque. And as I mentioned several minutes ago, the rule of thumb is this: the most efficient way to watch mind's antics is to silently and mentally recite the verb watch every time we feel our chest swell with breath. Let us turn our attention now to meditation. Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired by evolution to automatically access both the attic as well as the basement regions of this same spinal cord. These two extremes operating as a team could be described pretentiously as the nexus of our parasympathetic nervous system. They have evolved to help us relax in such a way that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, less defining, and as non-graspable as a vast empty void, like the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could look tantalizing to the eye, could feel non-graspable to the hand. And so we see whether we're talking about emptiness or whether we're talking about not self. We're talking about birthlessness, or we're talking about deathlessness. We are simply working with metaphors to describe the experience latent within each exhalation. The rule of thumb by which we most efficiently rest in mind's non-graspable aspect is to silently and mentally recite the verb rest each time we feel our chest subtly sink as gently we exhale. How easy is that? We sit comfortably. We use the verbs watch and rest to harmonize with the dynamo of our autonomic nervous system. And then we sit back and enjoy the show. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. 4. Meditate like a Jedi is made possible thanks to the generosity of viewers just like you. For the remainder of this morning's live stream, let us meditate like a Jedi. If you have just tuned in and you're watching on the Tube app where you see both my funny face and my visual aids, I would remind you that the essential instructions to the mindfulness and meditations and essential instructions are found on the upper right-hand corner of the page. My friends in the Clock app, the essential instructions are found directly overhead. The free fall of meditation could feel jarring to our rigid and controlling tendencies. A useful workaround is to play with a variation of Bengali crease counting. Let us rest the tip of our left thumb upon the lower set of creases of its little finger, that we might better keep track of our first set of 16 inhalations. Let us now rest this left hand, palms up, in our lap. Every time we silently and mentally recite the verb watch as we feel our chest swell with breath, we could advance our right thumb up the creases and tips of each of its fingers. Let us do this together as a team, beginning with the right little finger. Notice how my right thumb has officially run out of places to count. That means it's time to return my attention to my left thumb and advance it to the next set of creases. And now you get the basic visceral idea of how we could use our left hand to count 16 sets of our right hand's 6 inhalations. Or in other words, 16 sets of 16 inhalations each. We can count 16 inhalations on our right hand in a little bit more than a minute. We can count 16 sets of 16 inhalations each on our left hand in a little bit more than 20 minutes. While gathering our first collection of 20 minutes, we could rest the great knuckle at the base of our right middle finger upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up in our lap. When we begin gathering our second collection of 20 minutes, we could rest the second knuckle of our right middle finger upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up in our lap. And you guessed it, when we begin collecting the third set of 20 minutes, we could rest the third knuckle of our right middle finger upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up in our lap, all the while counting sets of inhalations. overwhelmed, the antidote is repetition. The more you, if you so simply join me every 12 hours for a week or two, and you too could master the Buddha's path. The moment you have a specific question about the philosophies or techniques of Taoism, Buddhism, Tantra, Dzogchen, Zen, or Mahamudra, do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window, for I tend to check for questions about every 5 minutes or so. In about 3 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's second lesson, followed by meditating like a Jedi. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.